Brilliant. So good morning. It's good to be here. So I am Zoe, pronouns are she, her, and I am the manager for Breakout Youth. And I'm here today to talk a little bit, very basically, around LGBTQ+, and give you some little bit of information about what that means and what that means for your young people. So I'm going to start with like a little introduction about what Breakout is. So we've been going for about 28 years. We work in Southampton, Isle of Wight and Hampshire, and we offer youth groups for young people aged between 11 and 25 who are LGBTQ+ or questioning. And that questioning bit is really important because I think often young people identify as one thing and then it will change and they'll go on a journey of exploration. And that's where sort of the questioning comes into it. So that's the Q part. Sometimes the Q part can also be in queer, but as a we like to use it as questioning as opposed to an identification. So I'm going to go through a few slides. I'm going to talk very broadly about what LGBTQ+ stands for. We're going to look at a few questions that have been asked, and then you can just ask any questions. How does that sound as a plan? So it works really well if I can actually work out how to work. So what is LGBTQ+? So this is an umbrella term, and actually it really benefits if you split it into two halves. So if you take the LGBT,
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're not seeing your next screen. Have you? I don't know if you've moved on.
Okay, I'm going to stop share. I'm going to start share. I'm going to do that. You see that now?
That's better. Yeah, thank you.
It's because I'm on two screens. I move one to the other. Technology. Okay, so LGBTQ+, where was I? So I would imagine that it's a really good way to split that into two halves. So LGB, so that pertains to sexual orientation. So that's lesbian, gay, and bisexual. So that's all about sexual orientation and sexual identity. The T part stands for trans, and actually that's about gender. And we'll talk more about what trans identity means in gender. The Q for us is about questioning. So that's anybody who doesn't kind of know where they are in either of those two areas. And the plus is just simply there because there are so many subsections between sexual orientation and gender identity that if we had every single letter, it would go on as long as the alphabet. So the plus is just to encompass everybody, to actually make sure we are as inclusive as possible. Brilliant. So what is sexuality or sexual orientation? So a person's identity in relation to the genders or gender to which they are sexually attracted to. So that's all about sex. So if I was to look at these flags, the top left one, so that is the generic LGBT pride flag. So that covers everybody. The one to the right is the bisexual pride flag. So bisexual is anybody that is sexually attracted to either gender or any gender. The pansexual flags, the pink, yellow and blue one, so that is for pansexuals. And pansexuals are not so interested in the gender of the person they're sexually orientated to. They are more about the human, the individual, the person. So it's not necessarily about gender, it's about the individual person. And the fourth one is the asexual pride flag. And so that's somebody who is not actually sexually attracted to anybody. They are more interested in a romantic relationship with somebody. So actually people who can have romantic relationships without having sex involved, and that's what asexual means. So there are lots of different sexual orientations in between that, too many to count, but those are probably some of the main ones. And actually people can be fluid in between. So if I think about bisexuals, people think, oh, you're equally attracted to male and you're equally attracted to female, but actually that's not the case. Somebody could be more attracted to female but come across a male they're attracted to. So it's a bit of a sliding scale. So I think it's just really important to think about, actually, when you come to sexual orientation, there are very, very many different versions of it or varieties of it, and people can change how they identify because actually life is about experimenting and then about who you are. So you might first off think you're one, but then actually a bit of experimentation, a bit of learning about yourself. As we get older, we learn more about ourselves as individuals and we can change. And so people can be quite fluid around their sexual and orientation and sexuality. And the same with gender identity. So gender identity, what is that? So gender identity is a person's sense of having a particular gender. And this is not necessarily the gender they're assigned at birth. So when we are born, we are assigned at birth. So when I was born, I was assigned female. You'll see that I introduced myself as a pronoun she, her, because I identify as the gender I was assigned at birth. So that makes me cisgender. So the majority of the world is cisgender. That is the norm. Although we don't like to think about things as norm, because then that means we're not very inclusive as people. if you think about gender identity, again, this is a fluid, moving thing. And actually trans, I've got another slide, I'll do that. So cisgender is a person you identify as the gender they assigned at birth. Transgender is an umbrella term, so that's anybody who does not identify with the gender they assigned at birth. So if, for example, I was assigned female at birth, but actually I feel internally, or I identify with the male gender, I'm a trans male, I'm a female to male, and vice versa. If I think about non-binary, that comes under the trans umbrella, but that's somebody who does not fit within the binary of male-female. So if you think about how we've been brought up, we're very male, we're very female. It's two very binary things, but actually a non-binary person doesn't identify as either. And if I think about gender fluid, that might be somebody who moves around. So one day they might feel more feminine, wear feminine clothes, and one day they might feel more masculine, wear masculine clothes. And actually that can be moving around depending how a person feels that particular day. When we think about gender identity, pronouns are really, really, really important. So that is why when I introduced myself, one of the first things I said was my pronoun, because I want to make it the norm that people can actually go, oh, okay, so she said her pronouns, I feel comfortable to say my pronouns. It's often quite good to ask people what pronouns they are, because sometimes visually it's not always obvious how people identify. A non-binary person doesn't visually necessarily look non-binary. So it's really important to ask how people identify. And then it's really important to use those pronouns. Let's be realistic, right? Everybody makes mistakes. We are born in a very binary world. So I think, we can beat ourselves up at making mistakes. What we should be doing is not beating ourselves up, is acknowledging we've made a mistake really quickly, not laboring the point, not making a big thing about it, acknowledging it, saying sorry, getting the correct pronoun, and then moving on. If you were to keep doing it, then actually that becomes quite rude and insulting. And that has a real effect on trans people because you're not respecting what their choices are. And also it can be seen as a bit of a microaggression. So people do it on purpose, and some people do it on purpose. That's a microaggression of not accepting people as they are, making a real kind of point about it. Excuse me. So the most normal pronouns are he, him, she, her, or they, them. So a lot of trans or non-binary, particularly non-binary people, will identify as they, them. You may hear ze, ze, or ze, them. That is not really within the English language, but it's another way of identifying people that don't fit with the normal binary gender norms. So they don't want to be he, she, they, them. They want to be their own individual pronoun. These are called neopronouns, and they are any set of singular third-party pronouns that are not officially recognised in the language. So it's made so people can feel comfortable with who they are. And you might come across some people that say they have no pronouns because they don't want to be identified anywhere on that male to female scale. So they might just want you to use their name. I think the important thing here to think about is finding out what people's pronouns are, making it the norm. So you're not just kind of going, oh, that person looks like, there might be, I'll ask them. You ask everybody, and then actually everybody gets used to that. Does that make sense so far?
It does. That's really interesting. I sort of think I might offend people if I sort of go into a room and ask. So it's quite nice to know that is.
But would you offend them if you first gave them your pronouns first? You're making it normal.
Oh, that's a good point.
So you wouldn't. So if you have it on your email, for example, so if you have your name and then your pronouns and your title, etc., you're making it normal. It's every day, isn't it? If you have it on your letterhead and when you sign things, have your pronoun. If you always introduce yourself with your pronoun first, what you're saying is you're giving permission to say, this is normal. I'm happy to tell you my pronoun. I want you to tell me yours. People might not want to tell yours, and that's all right. But it's about making it a normality. I think if you were just going, right, so what's your pronoun? That's when it becomes uncomfortable and actually offensive. If you've made it normal in your everyday life, and that's what we should all be doing across the board to make ourselves more inclusive. So really, if I think about trans, that's the opposite of cisgender. So cis is people that have been assigned at birth and identify with that. Trans are people that have not. Good?
Yeah, that's great.
A really nice graphic actually to look at this is the gingerbread person. There's also one called the unicorn, something or other. And actually it's a really good visual way of thinking about it. So if I think about identity often is in your mind, is how you think and you view yourself in your conscious, isn't it? And actually you can go from having So there's 0 is like no gender identity, so that might be I don't identify with either. And then there's a sliding scale towards womanness and manness. So that's in your mind, that's how you kind of feel within yourself. Attraction, so that's what you are attracted to, so that could be sexually, so that's your sexuality, or romantically. So if I remember the asexuals who don't feel sexual attraction, they still feel romantic attraction, so they can have romantic relationships. Sex is, you know, your sexual bits. I can't think of a better word, I'm so sorry. So that's often where you are assigned at birth. Genitalia, that's the word I was looking for, I'm so sorry. So that's, you know, genitalia, often that's where you can become assigned at birth what your gender is. And expression is how you present. So gender expression is, I often wear male clothes. So, you know, that I'm expressing something there by doing that. But this is a really nice way to sort of, and it really helps with young people to look at this and think, actually, these are the different places that make up the whole identity of you, both from a sexual orientation and a gender identity perspective. So it's quite useful. So just thinking about some stats. So this comes from the Stonewall 2018 school report. So it's a couple of years old, but I think they're still quite hard-hitting. So 2 in 3 young people have experienced unchallenged homophobia or transphobia in school or college. I think schools are getting better now at challenging it because I think there's more awareness, but I think a lot of it goes unchallenged. Just simple things like when young people say, oh, that's so gay. That is so offensive, but it's part of the language. So actually what we should be saying to people is that what you mean to say? Because actually that's offensive. So how can we say that differently? What is it you're trying to say? And you maybe use better language for it. So 78% of LGBTQ plus young people have reported experienced cyberbullying from people they go to school or college with. I think this is probably on the rise. If you think about the last year, we've been in lockdown, we've been all online, social media, you know, people, it's so accessible now to be able to contact people through WhatsApp, Snapchat, social media. And it's an unpoliced area, isn't it? So it's really easy for people to bully and be hateful to people in this format, and often young people will not express this as happening. So I think for us as professionals and as parents, this is something we should be quite mindful of, and maybe trying to get a safe environment and a trusting environment with our young people to kind of get them to be able to talk about what kind of social media stuff they're getting. 50% of young people have experienced poor treatment after revealing they are LGBTQ plus to a healthcare professional. I think often that comes down to because people just don't know how to deal with people. You know, when somebody comes in and they identify as a different gender, that sends some people's heads into a spin. And often young people and people in general will not talk about these things because they don't feel that it's a safe environment with a good trusted relationship. So I think that's something else for us to think about as professionals, as parents, is making sure our young people are getting the best medical care if they've come out as a specific sexual orientation or gender identity, and giving the young people confidence to be able to access that. So half of trans people in the UK are too afraid of how their family, school or employer will react to come out. It's really, really, really scary to come out. So actually they're really nervous. So I think some of the things that we can do again as professionals and families is to think about what's that safe space? How can we make it a norm? Again, a bit like using pronouns to introduce ourselves. How do we make it normal for us young people to be able to talk about actually how they identify and who they have links with? 2 in 5 LGBTQ plus people have experienced hate crime in the last year, up 35% from 2017. I can pretty much guarantee that will have increased now. 48% of transgender people under 26 have attempted or considered suicide in the past 12 months. Now, I cannot remember off the top of my head what the stat relation is to heterosexual young people, but I can tell you it's much higher in the LGBTQ plus community for young people considering suicide or attempting suicide, because actually there is real evidence to show that LGBTQ plus young people, it has a real impact on their mental health. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if they're nervous about coming out, they can't feel who they want to be, they're getting hateful comments from school, you know, they're not accepted, then actually that really does impact on isolation and loneliness. And actually we all know after the pandemic, being stuck with our own thoughts for so long, it actually cannot be healthy for us. And I think this happens to young people. And I think a lot of young people also turned to, we had a young person the other day who referred to us, and they got all of their information about trans identity from TikTok. Now, I think TikTok do some excellent videos for raising awareness for trans people and for sexual identity, but there is also a lot of rubbish on there. And if actually that's the sources where our young people get their information from, and from Facebook and all those kind of things. How do we regulate that to make sure they're getting real, true information? And I don't think you can. So I think one of our roles is to make sure we're signposting people where to get the best information from. And that's not from social media generally, I don't think. So I was thinking about some of the questions that you emailed to me, Jill, and I was thinking about how will I know my child is possibly LGBTQ plus or exploring? Well, there is no real way of knowing unless you are engaging with your young person and having conversations and sort of making a safe space for them. So I think it's important to remember that every LGBT person is unique and there are no common traits or telling signs or signals. Some people might present as more effeminate maybe, but actually that just might be them. That doesn't necessarily mean they are identifying one way sexually or one way gender wise. That might just be them. So it's really important to avoid any stereotyping. It's really important not to guess. And it's really important not to ascribe identities, because if someone is, for example, more effeminate, if you then say, oh, they must be X, Y, or Z, then actually that might be true. It might just be how they are. They might just use their hands a lot when they're talking. It's important for young people to feel free to explore who they are. And I think the best way that we can support them is to make a really safe, open and visibly supportive environment. So if I was thinking about positive LGBTQ plus role models, writers, authors, artists, so having role models of all sexualities and gender identities available to young people, especially young people who may not be able to communicate as well, so they might not have the language or the vocabulary to be able to kind of say how they're feeling. If you have stories, role models available, actually a really good conversation starter might be a young person voices their identification to somebody, and you can think, actually that's a really good in for a conversation, because then you can explore, oh, why do you feel like you identify with this person? What is it? Is it the music? Is it how they dress? You know, what is it? And actually that can have really good conversation starters for you. And then if you carry that on with open questions, so not closed questions, not leading questions, so you're not making assumptions, then actually you can start those conversations with people. So how can you help your child if they want to come out about a subject? I think the best thing you can do, firstly, making your safe space, helping young people have the language and tools to be able to identify or to find commonalities with, I think is really important. But to listen and to reassure them. I think as long as they know that you love them and support them, no matter what they identify as, it's the rest is kind of learning as you go. There is no one normal way of this happening. I think it's a journey. I think it's really important that young people go on it with their trusted adults in their life, because that's a journey you're going to go on together. And it's going to be a journey of exploration. It's going to be a journey of loss. It's going to be a journey of slight grief in some ways, because actually, if you've got a child who was identified as female at birth, but actually they identify as more male, then actually that can be really difficult for parents, I think. And that is a journey of loss and grief. But actually, if we spin it on its head, it's also a journey of discovery and welcoming, isn't it? Because you're actually welcoming the person into your life as the person they want or feel they are. And actually, they will be much happier. And I think there's something about parents and professionals kind of acknowledging that moment of loss and grief, but actually making it very small and then being open to think, okay, so that's changed. But actually what I've got is even better because I've got a happy, confident young person with who they are. There are some really good focused, youth focused and parent focused resources out there. I'll talk a bit about those in a second, and I will send out a whole list because there are many. The area there is less support around, I think, is the under 11s. There's very little support for that age group. It's the primary age group. Breakout start at 11. Most organisations I know start at 11. So I think there is a gap in the market, as it were, for that younger age range. So there might not be so much signposting that I can give you for that. And that's unfortunate. I mean, one of the reasons we don't do that, I think it's a very special skill working with primary school ages. And actually, I think our skill as youth workers is 11 upwards. So I think that there is a hole in that area. But equally, 5 to 8 year olds, for example, they could have their brains really switched on, and actually you would just talk to them in the same way, but maybe you would use simpler language, or you would accept them. And if they wanted to wear pink if they were assigned male at birth, that doesn't matter, does it? But it's letting them kind of explore that and thinking about it, and just think about how you can make language a bit more accessible to those young people. So can the GP help? The GP can help from a counselling or therapy perspective, so they can refer to counselling and therapy. but they cannot do anything specific around sexuality because it's not a disease, it's an identity, it's not a disorder. If a young person is struggling with a gender identity, the GP can refer to a specialist service, so GIDS or GIC. So the GIC is the Gender Identity Clinic, which is the adult version of their gender identity service. So it's part of the NHS. There's a couple of places. Tavistock Centre is one of them. It specialises in transgender, gender non-conforming, so gender fluid and gender variant, and questioning young people. For under 18s, it is mostly counselling and support they offer. They work with family, for parents, doctors, mental health services. It is mostly around counselling and support, because actually what they want to do is they want to take those young people on a journey, help them explore their identities. And for over 18s, then it could be they then look more at surgeries and hormone therapies and stuff like that. So the only way you can be seen at the GIC or GIDS is via a GP. So your GP is the only person that can make referrals to gender services in the UK. If you've already been seen, they'll usually give the contact details of a named doctor who's dealing with your young person, but that initial contact always has to come from your local GP. It's pretty much the only referral route in. So if we think about any, anything I should worry about, any warning and triggers, I think much like the answers to the first questions, there's no way of knowing if someone's LGBTQ+ or questioning, and it's not a safeguarding issue. So if a young person came out to you and said, I identify as a gender as assigned at birth, and I am heterosexual, I like boys, you know, that you wouldn't go, oh my God, that's a safeguarding issue. It does tip into a safeguarding issue when you think about risk-taking behaviour. So if people are experimenting and taking risks, if they are drinking too much alcohol, if they are using drugs, if they are meeting people they do not know, you know, they're putting themselves in risky positions. So then absolutely it becomes a safeguarding issue. But that very first comment of, do you know what, I think I like girls, that's not a safeguarding, that's just about someone's identity. It is important to remember, if we look at those stats earlier, the LGBTQ+ young people are more vulnerable across the board. So actually they might be bigger targets for grooming, for hate crime, and they will or they may struggle more with their mental health if they're not given the proper access and support. And if we look at mental health services young people at the moment, they are straining after COVID. So I think actually one of the things we need to think about is there might not be that instant support there. So what other things can we do as professionals and families to help support young people? What can we do? So that where it comes into the signposting in a little bit. We'll think about sort of mental health services for young people. So how can we sort of hold those young people before they can be seen by professionals? So I think the things to watch out for are pretty much as it would be for any young person from a mental health perspective. So are they being more secretive? Are they spending more time online? Do they have disordered eating? Are they having difficulty sleeping? Are you concerned about the friendship groups? Are they coming in at, you know, all sorts of times and nights and going out at all different times? Are they not going to school? Are they not focusing? You know, are they all over the place? So, I mean, those would be the standard things you look for mental health concerns for any young person. I just think we need to be aware that LGBTQ+ young people might be more susceptible to mental health. So actually, we just need to be more mindful of that. And just be more mindful because they are more vulnerable. They go to something they don't feel connected to their community. And if they're being bullied at school, they are actually really open to exploitation and grooming. So I think those are things we need to think about. So is there any questions you would ask your child? For me, I think it's really important that we don't ask leading questions. It goes back to what we were saying before about assumptions. It goes back to not putting what we consider someone's identity to be onto them. And it's about making that safe space. So it's really important that young people know that they can talk to you. And it might be a case of in your family unit that you are not, as the parent, the trusted adult. It might be somebody else. It might be a professional. It might be an aunt, it might be an uncle, it might be a sibling. And actually, as long as there is a trusted adult, that is brilliant for the young person because it means they can talk to who they feel confident to. And actually, that might be a first step. So they might talk to that other person and they might talk about how they're feeling. And then those conversations, then be more confident to talk to parents and things. So I think it's not to judge who they choose their trusted adult. Young people go to who they feel more comfortable with. But this comes back to those very core key things about making a safe environment for young people. Asking young people how much they know about people in relationships. So having conversations around people they are able to love and who they want to love is a really good way of getting that safe, trusting space. you know, we want them to be open about it. And it goes back to think about those role models. If we are open about saying our pronouns, about referring to positive role models, having conversations that actually it's all right for women to love women, and actually that's a really beautiful thing. That's going to give more confidence to your young person that these are okay conversations to have. So that's the, I think that is the main thing I'd like people to take away from here, is it's about creating that safe, calm, trusting environment to have any conversation, and what things can you put in place that also might start conversations, especially thinking people that might not have the vocabulary to actually do it themselves. So support there is out there. There is quite a lot, not much for under 11s, as I said before, but there's a lot of websites out there that have got a lot of good information. So I'm just going to spin through a few, but I will do a whole thing and send to you so you can use. So Gendered Intelligence is a London-based organisation, but they're a youth gender charity for trans and non-binary young people. There's lots of good information on their website. Mermaids is a charity for families of transgender and gender diverse young people as well. You have Chrysalis, so they are more Hampshire-based, and they are again for trans people and their families. They tend to work with 18 pluses though, so probably not so appropriate for the age range of young people here. Young Minds is a really excellent organisation around young people mental health, and they do have some separate stuff around LGBTQ+. But if we remember, LGBTQ+ young people are young people primarily, so they will have all the same things affecting them that every other young person does, and then maybe this additional layer on top. So actually the things that affect them from a mental health perspective will be pretty generic, but maybe magnified and heightened. And there might be some more specific stuff around LGBTQ+, but Young Minds has got lots of really good stuff on it. Childline and Shout. Shout is a text support line, and Childline is a phone. You can also email and text, and they have training around LGBTQ+. To think of the more negative sides, the Papyrus is a really, really good organisation for young people who are feeling suicidal or have suicidal ideation. And if we think back to those stats earlier in the slideshow, a lot of young people who are LGBTQ+ feel suicidal or have suicidal ideation. So they have lots of really good resources. They have good safety plans that people can fill out with their young people. And these will be things that young people can do to distract themselves, to make themselves feel calmer, who their support networks are. But they also have a phone line that you as parents can contact, and they give excellent advice, but also a phone line that young people can contact as well. And I cannot tell you how very brilliant they are. There are youth organisations around the country who work with LGBTQ+ young people who have a myriad of really good resources on their websites. So the Kite Trust, All Sorts Youth, the Proud Trust, I will link to all of these, don't worry. They have lots of stuff, particularly the Kite Trust, no, All Sorts, sorry, have lots of really good resources written by young people. So it really comes from the lens and the focus of young people themselves. So rather than a 46-year-old person writing it thinking, this is how I think LGBTQ+ people feel, because how do I know? I'm pretty ancient compared. This is stuff that's written by young people, so it has that real view and perspective of young people, which I think is really important. I'm often asked by schools to give information about how they set up LGBTQ+ groups in schools. I will also add some of that to the information, not because I expect you to set up a group, but because actually a lot of the stuff that's in there around creating safe spaces, etc., actually is really transferable to the home and can be really useful for thinking about how do you make your environment safe and inclusive for young people. So thinking, you know, schools might think about, for example, gender neutral toilets or school uniforms or sports kits. That's a big one, I think, for LGBTQ+ young people. So I will stick all that in there as well. And I will stick some generic helplines that young people generically might need to use. So that's me. Any questions? Anything I've not explained or rushed over? Or I can stop sharing as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. I think you've explained that really well. That was so useful for a parent who, you know, has 3 children, and this has not been a big issue in our family. So sort of from that perspective of sort of coming at this fairly new, it's really, really useful just to be prepared for what might come, but also to help understand how to help other people. So personally, thank you. And I kept writing down questions and then you kept answering them. So which is brilliant. So all my questions are done. Tracer, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to ask.
Not really. I did have one question, but I feel a little bit like you didn't big up Breakout enough, because Breakout, obviously you don't know me, but I have a 15-year-old gay non-binary autistic teenager who Breakout has been a lifesaver for us. And Kestrel in particular, I cannot praise her enough. Kestrel comes to my EHCP meetings, my SIN meetings, is there for me whenever I ask, whenever my teen asks, is just the most incredible human being I have ever met.
And I tell her, because she'd be so pleased.
Oh, she yeah, do, but she knows, she does know what I think. I mean, my teen has been with Breakout probably about 2.5 years. So probably most of the journey, a journey that I didn't see coming, because I think you're absolutely right, that there isn't a kind of a telltale thing, and we've done this, you know, and as I say, they are they, them, they are non-binary, they are openly gay, and actually you've really helped me actually understand that, because the way you put it so eloquently, that gay is their sexual identity and non-binary is their gender identity, and for me that's taken me 2.5 years to go, ding, okay, I get it now. Explaining to my husband might be a whole other ball game, but bless him, he's doing really well. He really is doing well.
It might help that, actually, because it does separate out where things sit, because mind and body are two very different things, aren't they?
Yeah, can we get a copy of that when you send over the other stuff? Could we?
I will send you the presentation.
Oh, amazing!
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, for us, just briefly, you know, Breakout have been amazing. I mean, Jill and I have had conversations. I've had conversations with other friends. Jill and I have known each other for a long time, and literally the last probably 6 years of my life has been the journey that I never thought. Well, part of it I knew I was going down, but the other bit I wasn't prepared for, and I knew nothing. I didn't know what non-binary was or anything. I've got elderly parents who are a complete different generation. So I'm constantly kind of playing referee with everyone. And you're right, people do get it wrong. I get it wrong all the time. And because they have Asperger's, everything's very black and white. So I'm not allowed to get it wrong. But I think I've written down loads of stuff. I mean, obviously, like, you will be sending it through, but I just think it's amazing. There's only one thing I want to pick up on, and it just came to me this morning. And mainly because of who might be attending today, or who those parents that might look back on this that's been recorded. I don't know if you agree with me, Jill, but are too, and I'm going to use the word ashamed, but that they shouldn't be. But I think, I mean, I put looking from the point of view of those who may want to remain anonymous, a parent, a carer, or a young person. How is that approached? Because sadly, the world has not moved on as much as we would like. And some of them, you know, are worried, ashamed. I'm not. I've embraced everything. But that has impacted my mental health. That's impacted our marriage. It impacted everything. I have 2 grown-up daughters as well, who, to be fair to them, have been very embracing of their sibling. And, you know, I've got 2 granddaughters who will, because they're being brought up in it, will be, you know, just be the norm to them. And it is about normalizing and making it safe. But you are completely right. I mean, unfortunately, my teen hasn't always gone down the right route, hasn't always looked at, has been to the darker side, if you see what I mean. You know, and it was horrible. And we're getting there now, but it's still we're on a seesaw all the time. And I think especially for Southampton parents, and I know like you do Isle of Wight, and it's Basingstoke, isn't it?
We do. I'm going to pick up Breakout now because you give me that. Thank you for your lovely comments. It's so lovely to hear that the impact we have on individuals, because actually as an organisation, I think we supported about 250 young people in the last financial year. But to hear about the individuals, because actually we're about the individual, because everybody is unique, like I was saying before. So we run youth groups. Currently we're virtual because apparently we're in a pandemic. So we do a virtual group in the Isle of Wight. We do one in Southampton, one in Basingstoke. We had one in Andover, but actually the uptake from young people wasn't as good as it could be. And I think that's because people assumed that, oh, young people will love virtual, they'll love it. Actually, no, they don't. Because what they love is they love instant gratification of swiping, liking, moving. And actually, when you're doing Zoom and stuff, you're looking at yourself. And if I think about young people who are born and identified by somebody else as one thing, but identify themselves as something else. You know, so if someone was assigned male at birth, but actually they identify as female and they look male, they might have started puberty. Puberty is a really difficult time for LGBT young people because their bodies change, especially for obviously trans people, their bodies change. So their voice might be low. So actually they don't like Zoom because they've got to look at themselves or hear themselves. So actually what we do is we make sure they're in a confidential space, do all the safeguarding bits. They can turn their camera off and talk by chat. It's one of the good things about the pandemic. But we do also do New Milton and Marchwood. So we do try and cover Hampshire. One of the things we found, Teresa, is that due to the pandemic, we've got people in lots of different parts of Hampshire who might not have normally be able to come to us because of the physical geography, say that word, of the groups. So I think what we'll probably end up doing is some sort of pan-Hampshire virtual group as well when we go back to in person. But I think your point about people being shamed, I think what we need to remember is a lot of us have been brought up, so I'm mid-40s, I was brought up in a very binary world, you know, very male, very female, and that's how we are trained in our minds to, you know, to see things. And if you think about it, and I'm quite open-minded, I've had quite an open life, you know, so actually I'm probably further along the journey than some people in my generation. They have older generations. I think people are ashamed, and it's really sad they aren't. But I think the reality is there are some LGBTQ plus young people who don't feel confident to come out to their family or their primary adults in their lives or whatever you want to call them. And actually they have a really lonely, isolated life, and actually their mental health does deteriorate as a result. And I think probably that's where places like Breakout come in, because actually we won't be their family because that's not appropriate. There's obviously a professional boundary, but we can offer some of that support. We can kind of go on that journey, talk about strategies to deal with dealing with some of these conversations and stuff like that. And obviously when you go into more adult services as well, I think that's the real important position of organisations, statutory and non-statutory, in some ways more importantly non-statutory actually. And that's not just around LGBTQ plus, that's around autism, that's around mental health, isn't it? And I think it's getting the information out to parents, but there will be some parents, like you say, who will not be open to that information. So it's how do we get that information out to young people around their parents, as it were? You know, what's the appropriate way to do that? Because you've got to consider young people use parental consent for some things. So it becomes very complicated, doesn't it? But I don't think
it's normalising.
Yeah.
It's normalising these things, isn't it? Because the world is changing. I mean, I'll put my hands up that I'm very worried about. I feel that my young person is, my teen is definitely a target. And we have all the things you said, I'm like, yeah, tick, yeah, tick, yeah, tick. I mean, Kestra's been a brilliant support there. And we're still quite happy living in the online world. I mean, yeah, now you've even explaining about Zoom, I'm like, oh, I get it now. And I hadn't even looked at it like that. So that's been a real eye-opener for me. And I think it will be for a lot of parents, because my team would much prefer to be, this isn't going to be very PC, and I'm sorry, but with their people, because they feel safe and it's about trust. But the world that they will go into, the adult world, is not like that. So yeah,
sadly not. And I think lots of young people are wanting to go back into our groups being in person, but I think they are thinking that they go back into in-person groups how they were before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we did start a few face-to-face groups back in November, whenever it was. And we were offering those young people who were not coming to our Zoom groups because actually we were worried about losing them. And they actually still decided not to come. And so some of our young people who came to Zoom groups came to our in-person groups. And I think they were disappointed. I mean, this is my assumption, actually. The impression I got, maybe from feedback from the youth workers, was it was because you had to sit apart from each other. And my partner put it really beautifully. I thought that when they went back to in-person groups, they'd feel more connected. But actually, what the physical space, the face mask, can't touch anything. Actually, what that did was also almost magnify the space between people. And actually, I think that could potentially have a detrimental effect. The other thing, this is not necessarily about LGBT at all, actually, it's just about young people. Something I thought about the other day and was having a conversation with was social media and the difference between passive and engaged. So I think lots of people think social media is really bad for young people, and I think in many ways it is. That's where they're going to get their information from. But there's a difference between passive users and interactive users. So let's imagine I was an artist. If I was an engaged user, and this is for young people as well, then I might be putting pictures of my art up on Instagram, for example, which is what most young people use, and people might like it, share it, comment. So I'm getting a real positive feeling from that. If I was a passive user, I might be looking at lots of other artists working, and they're so good, they're so amazing. Why am I not that good? So I think one of the things we need to be thinking about young people on social media is thinking about how do we get them to be more interactive with social media, so it's a conversation appropriate, thinking about grooming and exploitation, obviously, rather than just passive, because I think it's that passive use of social media that has a real detrimental effect because they're not engaging in it, if that makes sense. So I think if you think from a grooming perspective and LGBT young people, they're even more susceptible to that.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I was just wondering, because so many of our families obviously have children with autism, and I wondered, and this is probably being asked in completely the wrong way, but how that can impact if they are going through the other emotions of LGBTQ plus, how having autism can impact as well. And just sort of, I wondered if any thoughts or any sort of comments on that.
I think I'm not an autism expert. I'm going to lay that out there, and none of my team are autism experts. We do some training here and there, and we learn as we go. It's a bit like going on the journey as a parent, isn't it? You kind of learn as you go and kind of, oh, what does that mean? My personal thoughts about that is it's about communication, and sometimes I think people who are autistic sometimes struggle with that communication about their feelings. And actually, I think it's also about other people struggling to interrogate, understand what is being said to them. So actually, sometimes we might have people in the groups who are autistic, and then we might talk with them about, okay, so how do we make it so you can communicate with the rest of the group? Because some young people might see things very black and white, and actually they might not see that almost emotional nuance to stuff. So actually they could say some things that other young people might go, I'm not very happy about that. So it's how do we then, but actually that's a good thing to do, because what we're doing is teaching other young people who are not autistic how to be more inclusive and accepting, which is what we should all be doing, and effectively just being kind. So I think that communication can be a barrier, just people be able to express how they feel and having that vocabulary and language to do that. And I guess just also that understanding of just being more vulnerable, because sometimes not just people with autism, but sometimes marginalized groups find their communities, it's harder to find their communities, therefore they are that lone sheep at the back of the pack, aren't they? So maybe a bit more susceptible to being groomed, etc. But I think communication, but I think we at Breakout, we really try to look at every individual person as a unique individual. And we make mistakes. I make mistakes, I misgender people, I get things wrong. We are human. But I think the point is that we realise that we don't make a big song and dance so the person feels, I can't think of the word, central the attention that they don't want. But we acknowledge it, apologise and move on, and we try really hard not to do it. But we all make mistakes. We are human, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
That kind of answer your question? That's from my perspective. Absolutely.
It's been so useful this morning. I've got so much to go away and think about, but thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
And for all the stuff you prepared for us. I think it's a really, really good starting point. And I think this video is going to help a lot of our families.
You're very welcome. Thank you for welcoming me.
And thank you, Teresa. Yeah. Thanks, Teresa, for coming along and sort of.
Okay.
And apologies, I'm putting Teresa, not Teresa. So thank you, Teresa.
That's right.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, everyone.